My name is Dr. Raoul McLaughlin, and my subject is trade beyond the Roman frontiers. I have published several books on this subject. I am a member of the Classical Association in Northern Ireland. The question is, how did an African kingdom challenge Rome? For details on ancient African kingdoms, see my book, The Roman Empire and the Indian Ocean, Chapter 5, Beyond Egypt, the Nile Route and the African Kingdom of Meroe. The vast Saharan desert confined the Roman Empire to the Mediterranean fringe of North Africa, but the Nile River provided a route south. This led Romans into sub-Saharan Africa for exploration, commerce, and an encounter with an ancient kingdom called Meroe or Meroe. This explains how the Roman Emperor Augustus found himself at war with an African kingdom. Like its northern neighbour Egypt, the kingdom of Meroe had a long and complex history which predated the Roman conquest of the Mediterranean by several centuries. The wealth and fertility of Meroe depended on the Nile, which flowed from sources deep within Africa. The White Nile emerges nearly 4,000 miles south of the Mediterranean coast, and surges north to join with the soil-rich Blue Nile in the Sudan. From there it flows across a series of rapids known as cataracts, before entering Egypt near the ancient frontier city of Cyrene, modern Aswan. Meroe was part of the region known as Nubia, where the Nile flows through narrow gorges flanked by cliffs. The early Egyptians described Nubia as desolate, but it produced gold, and its inhabitants brought African goods to the first cataract, including ivory, leopard pelts, slaves, ebony, and Somali incense. At the time of the Pharaohs, these territories were dominated by an African people called the Kush, who had their capital at Napata, northern Sudan. Most of the early history of Kushite civilization is recorded in Egyptian hieroglyphs, but the Greeks also heard stories about them. They called the Kush Ethiopia, a name which the Romans adopted as Ethiopia. The Kushites were amongst the tallest people in the ancient world, and their warriors were renowned for their strength, with their king chosen as the strongest amongst all contenders. They were described in Greek accounts as possessing remarkably slender bodies, with an athletic physique and very dark skin. They served in the Egyptian army as specialist archers, as their height and strength allowed them to handle palm wood bows that were up to 6 foot long. They also carried spears and studded clubs carved from knotted wood. According to classical accounts, many warriors wore clothing fashioned from the skin of leopards and lions, giving them a distinctive appearance on the battlefield. They used red and white war paint, and Herodotus describes their characteristic appearance, painted half with gypsum and half with vermilion. The historian Diodorus says, "When their arrows are exhausted, they finish the fight with wooden clubs. They also arm their women. They set an age limit for female service, and most of them observe the custom of wearing a bronze ring in their lip." During the New Kingdom era, Egyptian pharaohs conquered Nubia as far south as the Fourth Cataract, and imposed many of their own political structures and customs on Kushite society. The Kushite ruling class adopted Egyptian culture, and when the power of the pharaohs declined in the 8th century BC, they led their African armies north to take control of Egypt. The kings of Kush established a dynasty of African pharaohs that ruled both kingdoms between 751 and 656 BC. These Africans appear in the earliest Greek legends, including the Trojan War. It was said that when the city of Troy summoned overseas allies to repel the Greek invasion of their homeland, an Ethiopian prince named Memnon came with a force of African warriors. Memnon was defeated and killed in personal combat with the Greek champion In later centuries, Greek visitors to Egypt were shown statues of Amenhotep III, said to be the Memnon named in that legend. Two heavily eroded giant statues known as the Colossi of Memnon are said to represent the Kushite hero. After the Assyrians invaded Egypt in 671 BC, the defeated Kush retreated back into Nubia. In 592 BC, they moved their capital south to a site called Meroe or Meroe between the 5th and 6th cataracts. There the Kush constructed sophisticated temple buildings which followed Egyptian burial practices, constructing steep-angled stone pyramids for their royal dead. When the Persian king Cambyses II conquered Egypt in 525 BC, he sent spies south with gifts, offering friendship to King Amenhotep, who scorned all but the wine and accused the Persians of deceit. Herodotus describes how the king produced an enormous bow and said, "When the Persians can string this bow, they can come against us, but come with many soldiers, for the Ethiopians do not die easily. Until then, the Persian king should thank the gods that we, the sons of Ethiopia, do not covet lands that are not ours." Despite this, Cambyses led an army south to attack Meroe, but the Persians were unprepared for the lengthy desert march and turned back when their supplies were exhausted. Nevertheless, part of northern Nubia appears to have been added to the Persian Empire, since King Darius received tribute from this region, and soldiers were levied to fight for the Persians. Herodotus reports that when King Xerxes invaded Greece in 480 BC, a large contingent of African troops were present in his army. Herodotus visited Egypt in 450 BC and travelled south as far as Syene and the island of Elephantine at the First Cataract. Elephantine may have received its name from its role in the ivory trade, or because the large boulders found on its shores resembled the hunched shapes of crouching elephants. The Ptolemaic queen, Cleopatra VII, was the last Greek ruler of Egypt. In the final civil war of the Roman Republic, Cleopatra and the Roman general Mark Antony were defeated by Octavian, the adopted son of Julius Caesar. By 30 BC, he had annexed Egypt and established it as the richest and most productive province in the Roman Empire. In 27 BC, Octavian became the first emperor of Rome, taking the name Augustus. Gaius Cornelius Gallus, a military colleague of Augustus, was appointed the province's first governor. Of equestrian rank, Cornelius Gallus was also a poet, much admired by Virgil, and of whom Ovid predicted, literary fame extending as far as his military commands, but enduring longer. When Gallus took office in Egypt, he led Roman forces south to suppress a revolt in Syene. During these operations, he crossed the First Cataract and seized the island temple site of Philae in northern Nubia. The local ruler accepted Roman terms, and representatives from King Tereticas of Meroe arrived to meet Gallus. To celebrate his exploits, Gallus had a trilingual inscription erected in Philae with messages in Egyptian hieroglyphics, Latin, and Greek. It records in Greek how Gallus received the title of proxenia, political associate, from the Meroitic ambassadors. In the Latin text, however, he claims to have accepted Meroe into Roman protection as a vassal state. Gallus continued to celebrate his exploits with grandiose monuments, and Dio Cassius describes how he set up images of himself practically everywhere in Egypt, and inscribed a list of his achievements, even upon the very pyramids. But after 2 years in office, Gallus was accused of disrespect towards the emperor, and when Augustus renounced their friendship, Gallus was threatened with numerous private lawsuits. He committed suicide rather than forfeit his family estates, and his death left any future settlement between Rome and Meroe undecided. This is the end of part 1 of this lecture. Please see part 2 for the war between Meroe and Rome. For further information, see my book, The Roman Empire and the Indian Ocean. Subscribe to my channel and follow the link below this video. Thank you.